Brian, you want to go ahead and run through the procedures?
Yes, sir. Happy to. This is Brian Yates with Schwartz, Page and Harding, and welcome to the Montgomery County MUD number 67 Board of Directors meeting for Wednesday, July the 21st, 2021. As in prior meetings and for the last time, before we go back to in-person meetings next month, we'll go through the remote meeting procedures and then perform a roll call. So to begin with, I need to remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded as required by the Texas Open Meetings Act. Second, please remember to state your name before you speak, including the making of any motions. When you're not speaking, please be sure to mute your line. Third, we will continue the practice of having a roll call to vote on each motion. After a motion has been made and seconded, please wait until you hear your name called and then respond with a verbal aye, a nay, or an abstention. Finally, we need to identify each person who's joining the meeting remotely today so that we can accurately reflect the attendance in the minutes of the meeting. I'll perform a roll call for the board members, followed by staff and consultants. If you hear your name and your company called, please respond by indicating that you're present in the meeting. Likewise, if you need to leave the meeting before it adjourns, please announce that you're doing so before you disconnect. Once I've completed the roll call for directors, staff, and consultants, I'll ask for any members of the public to identify themselves for the record. So starting with the roll call for the Board of Directors, Roland Johnson.
Present.
Larry Copeland.
Present.
Alan Frischke. Is Alan in the meeting? Okay, I'll mark him as absent. Paul Martin.
Present.
Alton Wicker.
Present.
We do have a quorum of our board present, so we will move on to the roll call for Woodlands Water staff. Jim Stinson.
Present.
Mike Mooney.
Present.
Maureen Bourgeois.
Present.
Kelly Lawson Kennedy.
Present.
Kelly, was that you?
It was.
Okay, I hear you now. Jeannie Scott.
Present.
Anyone else from Woodlands Water in the meeting? If not, we'll move to San Jacinto River Authority staff. Ron Kelly.
Ron is not in attendance.
Okay. Ed Shackelford.
Ed will be a little bit late.
All right. Chris Meeks.
Present.
Anyone else from the River Authority?
Yes, sir. We do have Pam Steiger with the River Authority, as well as Jamie Lewis with the River Authority.
Haley Heaney is also here.
Thank you.
Brett Rayleigh, San Jacinto River Authority.
All right. Anyone else from the River Authority? If not, we will move on to MUD 67 consultants. Do we have any MUD 67 consultants in the meeting this afternoon? If there are none, we will move to members of the public. Do we have any members of the public present in the meeting? We need to identify you for the record as well.
I'm Dan Kokar with Howard Hughes Corporation, and I am here today representing the developer. Hello, everybody.
Thank you, Dan. Anyone else from the public in the meeting?
Brian,
If not,
we have Adam here, our financial advisor consultant. Did you get Adam?
I did not. I did not pick him up on the consultant roll call. Adam, are you there?
He's
He
muted.
just texted me and said his audio isn't working.
Okay.
So, Adam, if you can hear me, you probably just need to dial in on the phone, dial in. Okay, any other members of the public present in the meeting? If not, Maureen, is there anyone else that appears to be in the meeting that we have not called?
There's no one else.
Okay, that will complete the roll call. Roland, I'll hand it over to you to begin the agenda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Since we have no members of the public present, we'll dispense with number 2. Number 3 then is consider an act on request for adjustments to or relief from specific charges imposed by the district. Jeannie or Mike, do you have anything?
Hi, Roland. This is Jeannie. I don't have anything.
Okay. Is Mike here?
Yes, Mr. President, this is Mike. I don't have anything this month either.
Okay. Moving on to consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda that a director would like to have removed for further discussion? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
This is Alton, so approved.
And a second.
So moved, I'm sorry.
Do we have a second?
This is Larry. I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. We'll vote on it. Alton?
Aye.
Alan, have you joined us yet? Larry?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
And this is Roland. Aye. Consent agenda is approved. Moving on to the regular agenda, number 9, adopt resolution casting votes for the MCAD special district candidate to be placed on the countywide ballot for the board of directors of the Montgomery Central Appraisal District. We have 2 candidates, Arthur Bredehoff and Peggy Hosman. Do we have a motion to cast all or partial votes for either one of these candidates?
This is Paul Martin. I move we approve the 9 votes for Arthur Bredehoff.
And do we have a second?
This is Alton, I second.
Is there any further discussion? If not, we'll move to a vote. Alton?
Aye.
Alan, have you joined us yet? Larry?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
And this is Roland. Aye. All 9 of our votes in will go to Arthur Bredehoff.
Roland,
Yes.
Alan's not going to be here.
Okay. Thank you. Chris, the Sanjak report.
Yes, sir. Brian, I just wanted to let you know that Ed Shackelford and Ron Kelling have joined the meeting, just as an FYI.
Okay, thank you.
Also, I do not have anything on the monthly report for the Woodlands, but Brett Radley with Lake Connor Division does have something to present.
Okay, we'll proceed.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me share my screen with you and let me know if it shows up adequately. Is everyone able to see that?
Yes.
Yes.
And are y'all seeing I'm seeing a lot of faces over on the right side of my screen, but you've got a clear presentation, is that right?
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's a very brief presentation regarding the Bear Branch 10-year project plan and the FY 2022 operations and maintenance budget for the Bear Branch division. As you are all aware, Lake Connor Division is responsible for all of the operations and maintenance of the Bear Branch Reservoir system through a contract with 5 MUDs, of which you are one. Every year we share our operating and maintenance budget with Woodlands Water, who then shares with you. There's a couple of things that are on the horizon that we felt it was important to get in front of you. And one of the 2 things that I want to highlight is the Bear Branch soil cement. So this is a armory on the upstream face of the dam. If you can see the picture on the right, it's the area highlighted in the dashed yellow boxes. Everything to the right of those boxes is standard concrete, but the area downstream of the concrete is soil cement. And we've known for many years that the soil cement is deteriorating. We had an engineering study in 2014 by Friesen Nichols that identified the deterioration. And then we had an engineering inspection done this past year by HDR, who also identified the deteriorating soil cement. That's something that they recommended we should address in the next 3 to 5 years. So this is, in a few minutes, I'll answer any questions that you might have, but this is one of 2 significant projects that are in our 10-year plan. The other one is we were doing a routine maintenance inspection of the dam, which we do on a monthly basis. And we discovered a void that you see highlighted in red at the junction of two angles of the emergency spillway. And we had noticed this prior. It was a small crack, and in 1 month's time, it had opened up significantly. So, you know, it's reason to at least question, you know, what's going on. We contacted our dam safety engineer. Of course, initially we just sent pictures and description and things like that. Our engineer advised us to immediately fill it with flowable fill. So we did that as promptly as we could. There was some rain impending, so we wanted to make sure that we weren't going to make it worse. So we went ahead and did a temporary filling with flowable fill. Subsequently, that engineer came out and did a field investigation and made a recommendation that we do a topographic survey as well as a ground penetrating radar survey of the spillway. And so you can see in the graphic on the bottom left, just kind of identifying the different portions of the spillway. The soil cement is the purple up on the top that we talked about a moment ago. And then most of the large area of yellow on each side of the service spillway is the emergency spillway. And then there's a splash pad at the bottom of the emergency spillway, as well as an energy dissipating plunge pool at the bottom of the service spillway. So the contractor that we contracted with to do the ground penetrating radar study did as much as they could. They weren't physically able to do everything in the spillway. Some of the slopes were steep enough that they weren't able to take those. But they did gather a lot of data. And frankly, when we got the report back, the report findings were very suspect. And what I mean by that is the report came back suggesting that a very large portion of the emergency spillway had voids beneath the concrete. And in talking with our dam safety engineer and getting actually a memorandum with an opinion and a path forward, they are very suspect as well. What may have happened is the company that we hired, it looks like they may have interpreted sand, a sand layer that's beneath the spillway, as void. I don't know how familiar you are with ground penetrating radar, but it's not very good at identifying a material, but it's good at identifying a change in material. And so that change that they discovered could very well have been sand. And as a matter of fact, our engineer told us that some of the voids were depicted in such, they were big enough that physically the concrete couldn't span that void. The concrete would not, the way it's designed and built, we would have seen it sink, or the depressions if the voids were as large as they are. So for that reason, the recommended path forward from our engineer was that in the next fiscal year, in FY 2022, that we engage an engineering consultant to do a turnkey investigation of the spillway. They'll hire their own destructive and non-destructive testing agencies to, they'll do cores and they'll look underneath the slab with cameras. They'll get a profile of the soil beneath the slab, as well as better interpretation, hopefully, of ground penetrating radar data. So the $250,000 that you see is earmarked for a project next fiscal year, $100,000 of which is for the engineering consultant to do all the investigative work and provide a path forward, and the other $150,000 is earmarked to do design, or at least initial design, of any required repairs that may be necessary after the investigation is complete. So is there any question on those two projects before I continue? Hearing none, I'll go ahead and continue. This is a projection of our 10-year project plan. Every year we project out 10 years ahead, and we identify any projects that we have on the horizon. The first, as you can see, there's only 4 projects on the upper left. The Bear Branch Dam inspection is mandatory. It's a state requirement. And so we're required to do that on 5-year intervals. And so that's why you see them appear in the plan where they are. That was, you know, we don't even have a vote in that one. We have to do it. And then the emergency action plan, the 2 items you see there, we look at the emergency action plan in detail every 5 years, but that money is not necessarily going to be spent. And what I mean by that is if we get to 2024 and there's not any need to redo the emergency action plan, then we won't spend those funds. Typically, the reasons why you would redo your emergency action plan would be if there were new requirements, if there were new calculations of rainfall for the area in certain storm frequencies, if we needed to do a new breach analysis or new inundation mapping or something like that. But if we do not have to do that, then those funds won't be spent. They're just earmarked in case we have to. And then, of course, the other 2 projects that I described before, the soil cement repairs and the voids. You can see the soil cement, we had an opinion of probable construction cost from our engineer, and we tried to fit it in within that 35-year timeline that the inspecting engineer consultant did this past year. So that's why you see it where it is. The $75,000 that you see in FY24 is for engineering, and then the remainder in 25 is for construction phase services, and the other associated engineering that goes along with the construction. The 3 years, 23 through 25, that you see with no dollars earmarked is because we really won't know the extent of what we need to do with the voids until we complete that investigation next fiscal year. And so we've just highlighted those. We wanted every MUD that contributes to this budget to know that these are projects that could be on the horizon. And as a result, because these are significant dollars compared to what you typically have in any given year, we're recommending that the MUDs set some funds aside in the way of reserves or escrow funds or whatever the MUD typically uses in order to be prepared for these big projects as they come. So our recommendation, as you can see, is that in next fiscal year that each MUD, or that combined, the MUDs set aside $500,000. And then in fiscal year 23, it's $1 million. And then 24 and 25, it's 1.5 million each. That's for a total of 4.5 million. That number was chosen because, as you can see, the soil cement repairs are going to be roughly $1 million. And our consultant has given us a bookend and the high on the void repairs, and the high end of the void repairs, which we hope we don't come to, would be a total replacement of the spillway, and that would be on the order of $3.5 million. So again, hopefully that's not required, but we wanted to be conservative. So hence the reason you see that number. And then the chart below just has each MUD's percent contribution and what that contribution would be if those reserves were set aside by that MUD. Any questions on that? And then this is just a short snip. This is a rolled up snapshot of next year's fiscal budget, or I'm sorry, operating and maintenance budget. And the main thing that we wanted to highlight here is that there is roughly, let me see if I can get the window out of the way. We expect by the end of this fiscal year to have roughly $84,000 left in the fund that could roll over to pre-fund next year's fiscal budget. And so and you can see that we have $568,187. That's the projected expense budget next year. And so the difference is $483,769. So just wanted to give you an idea of what the standard budget is, the standard every year O&M budget is for 22. And a large portion of that is the $250,000 that we set aside to further investigate the voids that you saw a moment ago. And then finally, this is just, of course, the upper chart is the contribution per mud by the same percentages that have been used for many years to fund the FY22 operating budget. And then below, you see what the combined, now it won't be reflected in any of our budgets that we manage, but if each MUD were to pay their share of the O&M and set their share of the recommended reserves aside, the combined expense would be shown in the column on the bottom right. So it just gives you an idea of where things would end up. So with that, that's really all I had to show. The whole point of this, we're not asking for any action by the board or anything like that. It was for information purposes only. And again, the purpose is just to say, let you know, hey, there are potentially a couple of large ticket items that are on the horizon, and give you a chance to start preparing for that. With that, I'll take any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Brett. Any questions for Brett?
This is Paul Martin. Brett, I'm just on the telephone line, so I don't have access to all your visuals, but I didn't hear you talk about the initial contractor who may have poured that cement and whether there was any liability issues on that contractor's part.
I'm going to do my best to answer. And as far as I know, the dam was constructed not by an engineering consultant like we would typically hire to do something like that. At least it was, of course, it was during development of the woodlands, and it was. I don't know the engineering specifications that were used. I do have as-built drawings, and I have been told by our consulting engineer that there are some things in the concrete that they would not have designed, and specifically some of the joints, the way the joints overlap, the water stops and things of that nature, they as an engineering firm would have designed differently. But I wish I had more specifics to give you, but I can get those if that's something that you'd like me to get for you. I certainly can, as much information as I can.
Oh, this is
Paul Martin.
Shackleford. I thought I'd also offer that this was built in the early 80s. And so you've got 30 years worth of service life to the dam. And so it's going to need some, most things that are 30 years old do need major maintenance. And that's what we're talking about.
Close to
Okay.
40 years.
40 years.
This is Paul Martin
Excuse me,
again.
40. I lost a decade.
Yes, Paul?
All right. So to answer your question, yes, I would like to know the specifications that were sent out with, with that bid package, and whether those specifications were valid or in accordance with the standards in effect at that time for that type of construction. I think it's just a due diligence, and I'm not suggesting, Ed, that when I was 30, I didn't need maintenance, but now that I'm older, I do need maintenance. So
we didn't need as much back then.
No, I just think it's a due diligence step that we should take. I think I, for one, at least, would like to know.
I will do my very best, and I'll get Ed and others to help me with that research and see what all we can find on that and get it to you. Anyone else? Was there anyone else on the call that would like to have that information as well?
Well, if you're going to get it from me,
Dan's been around a long time. Dan Coker's may remember.
Yeah, Dan, I don't know if you have any information on that or not.
You're muted, Dan Coker.
Well, I'll go ahead and send it to all the members of the board and Woodlands Water as well. And then if there's anyone else that needs it or wants it, just let me know.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Brett? Okay, if not, we'll move on. Chris, do you have anything else? Do you have anything else from the Sanjac?
No, sir.
Okay, then let's move on to number 12, receive an act on, consider an act on the fiscal year 2021-22 budget for the Sanjac Woodlands Division.
Yes, sir. So this is Chris Meeks. This item's on the agenda to give direction to the trustee on how to vote on the Woodlands budget in August. Also, in case there's any questions that need to be answered, we do have some folks here that can help answer them. I know Trustee Martin had some thoughts or requests at the trustees meeting. I didn't know if you wanted to cover those now or not.
Paul, do you want to share anything there?
I made just a couple of inquiries. Number one, were there any changes in the basic assumptions that the budget was originally put together? In other words, we've had a lot of rain. Has that any influence on the current year's operating budget, and does that affect next year's budget? Number two, I was interested to know what the incremental cost for Trinity River water for fiscal year 22 would have on our rates. And then number three, wasn't discussed, and according to Ron Kelling, he wasn't in a position to answer it, and that had to do with the blend ratio. And so I just, I guess it's not appropriate to talk about that at this point.
So this is Chris Meeks. I'll take the second item, the TRA option first. Anything that would happen with TRA would likely not impact the FY22 budget. However, if some items were done sooner than the planned, I guess to say, then the effect would be on the GRP rate, which would change the Woodlands budget only because of the pass-through as well as the expense for the GRP pumpage fee and rate. And that would be adjusted similar to how it was adjusted in June when GRP reduced the rate 4 cents from what was proposed, and we issued a revised budget. So nothing directly with the wholesale water and sewer rates in the Woodlands, just the GRP pass-through would be adjusted if anything TRA went through.
This is Paul Martin. So I thought in December of 2021, San Jacinto River Authority had to put together some sort of plan, and I didn't know whether that incurred additional expenses that would impact the 22 GRP budget.
Ed, do you have anything to add that I may be leaving out?
Well, Paul, if it does, it might be 1 or 2 cents per thousand. And the reason I say that is we're currently paying roughly $237,500 for the water option.
Yes.
In the PowerPoint presentation I'm going to give in the next agenda item, there's a $250,000 expense in negotiating with TRA on a new water service area agreement. There's also some potential costs that would initiate for, once that's done, once the service area agreement is in place, is to start initiating a innovation transfer permit. And so there might be some costs associated with that, but it's not all going to ramp up at one time. And I'm trying to make certain I don't get my pennies per dollars mixed up, but I was recalling that 1 cent on the GRP equals about $200,000.
Yes.
And I'm seeing heads nodding from my counterparts. And so that's why I say it wouldn't impact the GRP rate or the surface water rate more than a penny or two if all the support is there encouraging STRA to continue to pursue the TRA water option.
All right.
And if I could
did that answer your question?
If I could add one other thing, if it does have any impact, it wouldn't have any impact on FY22.
Okay.
So this is Chris Meeks again, going to Director Martin's first question or thought on baseline assumptions. Excuse me. No baseline assumptions have changed from when we developed the 22 budget. when it comes to water demand, over the years, we've used various different scenarios to try to buffer out the wet years and the dry years to get to what you could consider an average year. So to develop the actual assumptions for FY22's budget, we used a 3-year average of the last complete full fiscal years, being, I think it was 18, 19, and 20, if you will, at the time, possibly 21. But so we have also looked at and seen if there's anything on the maintenance side that we needed to adjust, anything with the fuel. Those assumptions are taken into consideration largely in December and January. Pam, Jamie, I'm not sure if y'all wanted to add anything related to those assumptions.
No, the assumption, the only thing we came down on from the original assumption was healthcare insurance. I'm sorry, this is Pam Steiger. Is the healthcare assumption. We had a higher percentage, and then we got the actual on healthcare, and so we went ahead and came down to the actual. But other than that, no, Chris, not that I recall.
So with that, this is Chris Meeks. With that, there have been no changes to the Women's Division FY22 budget from the one that we presented in June or passed around in June.
Chris, this is Jamie Lewis. The only change that I could think of, and I believe it happened before June, was we had a slight change in production of GRP water to match the GRP revenues piece. We had some intercompany that was not matching, and so we had to change some production rates to make that match. That's the only thing that I can recall that was a change.
Yes, ma'am. This is Chris Meeks again. That was in the June budget that was given out as revised.
I thought so. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So if there's any other questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Any other questions? If not, do we have a motion to approve to give Paul direction for the trustees?
This is Alton, so moved.
Okay, do we have a second?
This is Larry, second.
Okay, we'll move to a vote. Alton?
Aye.
Larry?
Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
And this roll on aye. Okay. Number 12, receive and act on information for retaining the Trinity River Authority water supply agreement.
Good afternoon, directors. This is Ed Shackelford with Ascension River Authority. I'm going to share my screen. This is regarding the Trinity River water supply option for Montgomery County. And we talked about this back in May. We presented it to the trustees last week, kind of refresh memories, and they recommended we come back to each of the MUDs and visit about this. And the reason we're revisiting is we had asked back in the very beginning for some sort of acknowledgement, either for or against, for the River Authority to continue or not this water supply option. So I'll get into the specifics. So hopefully you can see the screen. The issue basically is Montgomery County is continuing to grow. More people are moving to Montgomery County. Water demand is increasing. There is a need for water supply options beyond a certain date because the lake and the aquifer will have peaked, if you want to use that word. There are a number of different strategies that can be used for developing water. Obviously, lake water is one source. There are other options, but the one in conversation today is the Trinity River water supply. The water supply, being discussed is a 50,000 acre feet per year water supply option coming from Lake Livingston into Lake Conroe. And so in the Region H, I think you all have heard about Region H planning group and that it looks at water planning strategies, but for a 50-year period. The chart that you see in front of you is developed by the Region H Planning Group. And if you look at 2020, under the municipal category, they're saying that currently 101,000 acre feet of water is being used in Montgomery County today. And as you follow that same line all the way across to the far right for 2070, which would be the 50-year planning period, that number almost triples. And then go down to the bottom and see the two numbers that are circled in red. In 2030, there's got to be roughly 141,000 acre feet of water available. And in 2070, almost 290,000 acre feet. To give you some points of reference, Lake Conroe has an annual yield of 100,000 acre feet. And if not knowing what Lone Star is going to do, but right now, most of the water that's permitted out of the aquifer is probably around 90,000 acre feet. So if they allow 100,000, that would mean by 2050, the 200,000 acre feet of water that's available is being used. And anything beyond 2050 is new water. New water being either this 50,000 acre feet or some other source. So there's got to be some long range planning because it takes a while to develop the water. We've talked about where this water would come from. It would come out of Lake Livingston and into the top end of Lake Conroe. Lake Livingston has an annual yield of 1 million acre feet. Houston has 3/4 of it, 750,000 acre feet tied up. That's their water rights. So the TRA had 250,000 acre feet per year of water rights to be able to sell. And they're not selling the rights, they're selling leased water. And that's what we've talked to them about. To I'll say, perfect a project to bring water from the lake, from one lake to the other, requires pump stations, pipelines, and canals. Estimated cost in today's dollars, say, call it 300 million. And if you recall the GRP program, when it was done in starting in 2012 through 2015, there's $500 million worth of infrastructure. So let's get back to current day. Current day, we have a water supply option contract between the San Jacinto River Authority and Trinity River Authority. We're currently paying $237,500 annually. That is built into the rates that you currently pay. And you heard me say a moment ago that 1 penny on the rate is equal to about $200,000. So that's being paid by all the customers of the GRP. So let's talk a few more specifics. In our option contract, there are a couple of deadlines that we've got to meet if we go forward. December 2021, the contract says we need to create a service area agreement between us and Trinity River Authority. It's going to require the lawyers, so it's estimated to cost about $250,000 to create that agreement. It also requires that we initiate an interbasin transfer permit to move water from the Trinity River watershed into the San Jacinto River watershed. Again, more lawyers, permitting through the TCQ, may even require some legislation through the legislature to help solidify this transfer permit. Our lawyers are estimating that to be around $2 million, and it will take several years to get it accomplished. And then by April of 2028, we are to convert the service area agreement to a water supply contract and start paying a reservation fee on the water, the 50,000 acre feet. That reservation fee is estimated at $1.5 million. So there's the big money needed. Let's talk about the impact it has on your all's rates. So if you'll look at the bottom of this slide, potential increase above SGRA GRP rate. During the period 2022 through 2027, that estimated cost is 10 cents per household per month to convert from our option contract to a reservation contract. So that means roughly a penny per 1,000 gallons, assuming that the average user is 10,000 gallons a month. That's where the 10 cents comes from. Beyond 2028 and beyond, until the project, the actual engineering and construction starts, the reservation for that water would be roughly 20 to 25 cents per household per month to pay for the 1.5 million. And again, that's based on the average user being 10,000 gallons a month. So what do you need? What are we asking for from you? We're asking that you all decide whether you are interested in SGRA continuing to pursue this long-term water supply option or drop it. I will tell you that back in May, the trustees and the MUDs were all in favor of retaining the option for this long-term water supply. The MUDs that we have met with this week have all voted in favor to retain the option or to continue to pursue the option for the long-term water supply. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Ed, this is Roland. I got a question about the TRA reservation fee. How is
Sure.
that used? How is that used?
How will TRA use it?
Yeah.
Well, we don't know, but think about this. That lake came online about the mid-70s, shortly after Lake Conroe did. So TRA invested in the long term of building a dam. They have release gates. They have, just like San Jacinto River Authority does, they have operation and maintenance expenses on that lake and on that dam. They also have, there are probably some cost within their system for that this reservation fee would go to help cover.
Okay, so it's administration and maintenance, basically.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That's what we're anticipating, because that's what, you know, when we charge a reservation fee, it goes against some of our O&M costs.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for Ed?
This is Paul Martin.
Yes, sir.
So at the trustee meeting, I think Ron Kelling pointed out that it would be significantly cheaper to have the city of Houston actually take that water than it would be for the San Jacinto River Authority to spend $300 million plus over time to get that 50,000 acre feet to Lake Conroe. Did I mishear or misunderstand that?
Well, their infrastructure is already in place, so they don't have to do anything. They don't have to build any new pumps or any new canals. So that part, yes, it's less expensive, but their cost of water is more per thousand than ours, if you look at the raw water costs. The other issue is this is leased water. While Houston will buy leased water, you know, if we wanted to trade this 50,000 acre feet and keep it in the Trinity River and let it come through Coastal Water Authority canals versus trying to trade for 50,000 of Houston's water rights in Lake Conroe, you know, they're not going to trade owned water for leased water. That's one thing. Plus, we already have Houston's water leased for future use in Montgomery County. So this 50,000 is anticipated for beyond the 2050 timeframe.
I'm sure as a San Jacinto River Authority is very thorough, and I appreciate your presentation. It's very concise, and I understand it. But my thoughts are, is there any possibility for taking some number, 300 million, and consider the installation of another dam that we would have, and thus the created lake that we might have access to?
In the San Jacinto River watershed, probably not.
What about an adjacent watershed?
Well, adjacent would be Trinity River, so that'd be Lake Livingston. There was one dam proposed up around Beedies, but my recollection is it didn't have the same yield as the Estuary dam, current dam. And then that would take probably 30 to 40 years if it were to move forward. That would take 30 to 40 years to pull together because of land acquisitions, designs, permits. The two reservoirs that are being built, one that's being built right now and the one that just completed and filled, those have been in the works for almost 40 years. So we would almost be we'd be a little behind the curve in being able to deliver water. And then you'd still have to get, if it were Beedies, you'd still have to get the water out of Lake Beedies into to Lake Conroe. So you would still have a pipeline cost, potential pipeline cost.
Even with the Trinity River 50,000 acre feet, Montgomery County is still going to be short water supply.
Correct.
Okay, so there has to be some long range thinking to try to reduce that gap, correct?
There's a potential for being short about 40,000 acre feet. So the question becomes other sources, and maybe by 2070, of course, I don't want to presume too much, but I don't think any of us on the call will be around by then. But desalination might be a little bit cheaper. There might have been new developments, new technology for getting water out of the Catahoula or the Deep Jasper and getting it to the surface, treating it and delivering it. There may be the need for greater conservation, less irrigation, just more beneficial use for actual bathing, cooking, and less irrigation. Hoping we don't have snow melt.
Well, if we have another February 2021, we might.
I understand. But those are some of the things that the Region H Planning Group is constantly every 5 years, they're updating this regional plan to develop strategies based on new technologies and other opportunities. Because, when you look at this, the needs chart, the municipal use is the greatest category of use for Montgomery County. Irrigation is a small amount of water. Manufacturing is a small amount of water. Steam and electric power, again, small amount of water. And so the municipal use, domestic use, is the greatest need. Because and going back to other watersheds, Paul, another option would be if there's any water available in the Brazos, but you also have pipelines to bring it out of the Brazos over to Montgomery County. And that's going to be expensive because that water requires a lot more treatment for it to be drinkable.
Any other questions for Ed? If not, do we have a motion to approve Sanjak moving forward with the Trinity River water supply agreement?
This is Paul Martin.
Larry, so move.
Okay. Larry moves and Paul seconds. Alton,
Aye.
Larry,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
and this is Roland, aye. Okay,
Thank you, gentlemen.
Number 13, consider an act on appointing a stakeholder subcommittee member to participate in the SJRA engineering consultant meetings related to water plant consolidation.
In your packet, there was a copy of an email from Ed Shackelford to me that does a pretty good job of explaining the duties of this position. Our intent is to offer this to each of our 10 MUD districts. We've also offered a stakeholder seat to MUD 386, which they accepted. We've got the Howard Hughes Corporation, Dan Cokerst, we've offered them a seat at the table. JJ Holly, our chamber president, has accepted a seat. So it's a fairly substantial commitment. Ed can give a little more detail on that if you're interested, but we want to make sure all the MUDs have an opportunity to be at the table during those detailed discussions. But now understand, you will also get an opportunity to see what comes out of that stakeholder group at the MUD level and at the trustee level. So if you decide that may be more than you can commit to, you will get another opportunity to hear about what's discussed there.
Okay. Ed, do you have anything you want to add to this?
No, sir. Unless you have questions.
Okay. Are there any questions for Ed? If not, do we have any one of the directors that are particularly interested in serving in this capacity?
It's going to be a very riveting conversation.
Yeah, apparently so.
Well, this is Paul Martin. I think this concept originally came up during an audit committee meeting or meetings. And it was presented by San Jacinto River Authority as a possible option to the long-term financing discussion that was going on, which is basically a replacement in kind in place as things aged out, as assets aged out. So it was presented to the audit committee, and the audit committee said we probably should pursue this to make sure that we're making a valid conclusion before we just spend $300 or $400 million replacing assets that are going to be aging out. Maybe there's a better way to do it, or maybe we gain insight into the replacement issue just by going through this process. And when you consider the cost of $1 million against the $400 million expenditure, it just seemed logical to try to pursue this. And so, having been in favor of pursuing it, I feel like, I have a stake in this thing. But if there's any other member on our board that would like to take this position, I would be happy to step back.
Okay, with Paul's comments, and I nominate Paul as our representative. Is there a second?
This is Alton, I second.
Okay, we'll vote. Alton?
Aye.
Larry?
Aye.
Paul?
Abstain.
And Roland, aye. Thank you, Paul. Okay, number 14, the attorney's report.
This is Brian. Thank you, Roland. A couple items to mention under the attorney's report today. One, the governor has formally announced that he will be rescinding the disaster proclamation related to COVID that suspended the in-person meeting requirements under the Texas Open Meetings Act, effective as of September the 1st. So any entities that have not gone back to in-person meetings by September the 1st will be required by law to do so at that time. Shouldn't affect 67 or any of the other Woodlands MUDs, since they have indicated intent to start in-person meetings in August. But wanted to make you aware that that has finally been announced by the governor. Also, the legislative summary for the 2021 session is up on the Google Drive. Overall, it ended up being a fairly quiet session for special purpose districts. Number of bad bills were introduced during the session as usual, but we were able to successfully play defense on those and get those modified into a form that was no longer objectionable, or were able to get those bills defeated. So it's nice to have a somewhat quiet session every once in a while. We are monitoring the special session, at least what there is of one at this point, and any potential future ones, pending all the political gamesmanship. If there is actual legislation passed that relates to elections and how elections are conducted and how voters are qualified and identified and all that kind of stuff that are generally applicable under the election code to all political subdivisions, then we will of course look at that to see what modifications, if any, would be needed to the district's practices for future elections. But right now that's pretty much in flux. Those are the only items I have of a general nature to discuss under item 14. Happy to answer any questions if y'all have them, and then do have a few other items after that to cover with the board.
Okay. Any questions for Brian? If not, Brian, let's go ahead and proceed.
Okay, item number 14, discussion regarding proposed annexation of a 3-acre and change tract and a almost 8-acre tract into the district, and take any action necessary in connection with those proposed annexations. You will see an exhibit on page 27 of your packet that shows where this property is located. The request has been made by Howard Hughes to have this property added to the boundaries of the district. On page 27, the properties that are being looked at are in white. I think there's a small portion of one of these tracts that is actually a township-owned park, so we'll get a new meets and bounds description for that tract to exclude that property, since there's no point adding that property to the district since it wouldn't add any taxable value. At this point, we just want to get this in front of the board and I think we have Dan on the line. He had stepped away for a minute. Dan, did you have a chance to join back in?
Yep, I'm here to answer any questions the district may have. We're following up on we're following up on a promise that was made to the district years ago. Meets and bounds are now prepared, and we've got to modify it according to Ryan's comments. But other than that, these are two highly prized commercial properties that abut the waterway, and that would I think it's would be a good asset for the district.
Dan, this Roland, what are the commercial plans for those tracks?
Right now, the best I can tell you is they're probably going to be residential, but there's nothing guaranteeing that at all. It could be office, it could be residential. Of course, if it's residential, it'll be a multi-story structure.
Okay.
This is Paul Martin. So these two parcels, are these the last two parcels that are in MUD 67 in this area?
Yes, these would be the last. These are the last two of non-MUD properties that we have left in the woodlands, in the town center area.
Okay. And now, is one of those parcels the recent check that we transmitted to you, or the recent wire transfer, that we called Section 20?
No.
So these two tracks are in addition to the Section 20.
Yeah, Paul, since you don't, do you have access to the picture of the two tracks?
I'm looking at a piece of paper here. It's one's called 2G 2A and 2G 1A, and
right. Yeah, those are the tracks we're talking. I want to make sure you had the photo in front of you. Is all I wanted to make sure of.
right. And then there's also 21-3D.
Yeah, 2L. Yes.
Or 2L. Excuse me.
Yeah, there are two tracks. They're in the white. They're the area that's in white. Exclude the Riva Row Boathouse. It's on the far left-hand side of 2G2A. Those 2G2As and 2G1A and 2L3Ds, those are nomenclature that we use to identify all the parcels. There are two tracts of land that are going to be associated with this annexation.
And what's the status of the infrastructure for these two parcels?
All the infrastructure is in place. There is a chance that no, all the infrastructure, to the best of my knowledge, is in place. Water lines, sanitary sewer lines are there, and drainage is there.
Okay. Thank you.
Right.
Any other questions? If not, do we have a motion to accept the annexation?
And this is Brian. So the motion would be to authorize the preparation and submission of the petition for consent and the application for consent to the city of Houston. Since we're Houston ETJ, as y'all know, it's a two-step process. Got to go to the city, which can take a little while. And then once we get city consent through their ordinance, then we can formally come back to the board and adopt the order adding the land. So this is the first step of that two-step process, which is to approve moving forward, execution of the petition for consent and submission of the application to the city.
Okay, thanks, Brian, for that clarification. Do we have a motion to that effect?
This is Larry. So move.
And a second?
This is Alton, second.
Okay, Alton,
Aye.
Larry,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
and this is Roland, aye. Okay. 16, or Brian, you want to continue?
Yep, this is Brian. Thank you, Roland. So this resolution concerning developed district status for tax year 2021, we went through this exercise for the first time last year in connection with starting to implement the requirements of Senate Bill 2 that was passed in the 2019 session. I'm going to kind of slow down and go back through Senate Bill 2 a little bit and the impact that it had since it's only the second year we've gone through this process. It's a yearly requirement, so I won't go through all this every year, but we'll go ahead and go through it today. So Senate Bill 2 modified the rollback calculation status for districts. As you know, historically, districts had an 8% rollback rate for M&O taxes, and as long as a district didn't collect more than 8% more in O&M taxes on the average homestead versus the prior year, you weren't subject to a potential rollback election. If you exceeded that amount, then voters had to petition, and in a sufficient number, roughly 3% or so of registered voters had to file a petition to force the election. Elections virtually never happened. As part of the legislature's effort to constrain the increase in property tax burden on landowners in the state, during the 2019 session, they passed Senate Bill 2, which was the property tax reform bill. SB 2 has a lot of stuff in there, but what we're focusing on today is the rollback portion. And what SB 2 did for rollback taxes is it created a two-tier structure that distinguished between developed districts or developing districts. And the metric that the legislature used to determine whether you were developed or developing is whether or not the district has constructed and financed the facilities and sites necessary to serve 95% of the district's ultimate projected build out. So in implementing the bill last year, we developed a system with all of our consultant engineers who work for our district clients to have a form that those engineers filled out, since they are most familiar with each district's facilities and capacity and build out needs, for the engineers to fill out the form and confirm whether or not the district has crossed that 95% threshold or not. Based on that form that's completed by the engineer, we prepare the resolution to the effect that the district is either developed or developing. We have received, and so if you are a developing district, then you keep your 8% rollback rate, and if you exceed that, the requirement to petition for voters to petition to force an election stays in place. So it's virtually status quo from the prior regime to the new structure if you're a developing district. If you're a developed district, then your rollback rate drops from 8% to 3.5%. And if you exceed that 3.5% amount, you are automatically subject to a rollback election. There's no petition requirement, nothing. With the state of the real estate market nationally and in the state and locally, it's very possible that we could have instances where districts are not proposing to increase their tax rate, but because of the increase in property values, the average homestead residence could increase by more than 3.5% in a year, which would force a district to actually lower their M&O tax rate in order to not be subject to a rollback election. For 67, the information we've received back from LJA today does reflect that you are still one of the few developing districts in the Woodlands, and so you are still in the 8% framework for your rollback election. So we do have a resolution prepared this evening for the board to consider, and do need y'all to approve that, declaring that for 2021 you are a developing district based on the documentation that's been provided by the engineer. And that form is actually attached to the resolution as an Exhibit A, and that's how we have it for all of our districts. Happy to answer questions if you have them.
Any questions for Brian? If not, do we have such a motion? Okay, I move that we have such a motion here. Do we have a second?
This is Alton. I second.
Okay, Alton,
Aye.
Larry,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
and Roland. Seemed like a little simpler way of putting it. Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, this is Brian. Thank you, board. Item 16, discuss partial termination and modification of the tax abatement agreements with the district, HL Champion Holdings, and Exxon Mobil. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dan. We don't have any representatives today from Exxon Mobil, but we'll turn it over to Dan to give the board an update on where things stand with those tax abatement agreements.
Sure. And I have very limited information in that regard. I will pass on to you what we know right now, and that is that Exxon has cured the problem that they had at the two buildings in Mud 67. There is some information out right now that they may go ahead and pay those back taxes, but I don't have any firsthand knowledge of that because they may not want to continue to have the situation corrected. And that's the extent of what I know about the deal at this time.
Okay.
Paul Martin. I guess this would be for our council. I believe the county, who supposedly is taking the lead in this issue, was meeting on July 13th to discuss this issue and perhaps render a direction or something. Did they have the meeting? And if so, what are they doing?
This is Brian. So I have not received any information from the county. I also represent the Woodlands Road Utility District, and so they would be considering any change as well if the county changed its agreement. And I have not heard anything from the county as to that district as well. So I don't know that there actually was any action at the meeting last week regarding the agreement, and it would be at the election of ExxonMobil. I mean, where things stand, status as of now is that they had more people than they needed in building A, not enough in building B, so they shifted some people over, cured, and then they came to us and said, hey, we're considering vacating the buildings and would be interested in looking at a partial termination of full termination of one building's abatement agreement, a partial in the other, and possibly Howard Hughes taking over that abatement agreement into the future. I haven't not heard from ExxonMobil since our last board meeting. I don't know if they pulled back on that or if they're still in discussions with the city, but I have not received any confirmation that item was considered or approved at Commissioner's Court.
And the HHC portion of that, the negotiation for potentially continuing a portion of the tax abatement on one of the buildings is currently being worked on with the county.
Brian, would it be appropriate to just table number 17 then?
Yeah, this is Brian. There's no action. We kept this on here as an update because where we left it last time was that ExxonMobil was going to provide additional information once they had their agreements approved by the county. So we can just keep this on as an update item at this point.
Okay, sounds good. You want to move on then, Brian?
This is Brian. Yes, that is all I've got through my items. I think as far as item 17, review and or action on staff update regarding the Water Development Board financial assistance application related to the Bear Branch improvement concept. Jim did have, I think, a meeting with you and
Bruce
Reeser this morning. And do you want to go ahead and give an update on that discussion, Jim, and where we stand at this point?
Yes, and Roland can certainly help me with that. Well, I think I would categorize the discussion as productive, but there was something that was revealed that does have create a concern. And Bruce was saying that he did not anticipate the township making a decision on a full 50-50 partnership prior to November. So that creates some concern, but he did seem open to, if we have to move forward sooner than that, which we likely will, open to the idea of providing a cash contribution to this. I don't know what that amount would be, but I've asked Brian and Jan's office to work on a schedule, assuming we do get the extension, which we're anxiously waiting to hear back on that. We would need to be closing by the 1st of March. So if we work back from that, when are, I guess, absolute dates that we have to have information to move forward?
I think that's a question for Brian.
This is Brian. So I can work with Adam in terms of a bond issue schedule, assuming that we get the extension. There does have to be lead time to get documentation pre-approved by the Water Development Board before the bond sale, and get that to closing. Off the cuff, I would think we'd need the interlocal agreement structure, an agreement in place in the next couple of months, so that we know how we're structuring the deal. Because if the township is not involved, then we are likely not doing 2 bond issues. We would just be doing the one for the WS&D bonds with cash contributions from the other partners. And that would impact the par amount and how we structure the bond issue. And if the township was involved, then we would potentially be doing 2 bond issues to be able to get the maximum amount of loan and the corresponding grant amount. So we're going to have those items of the structure, I think, hammered down in the next couple of months at most. Certainly not November. That's not going to work. Adam, are you on the line?
I am.
Anything to add on potential schedules? Yeah, I mean, I know we'll have to work on a little more detail to get into that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing will just be getting the necessary approvals, the more finite approvals on the actual projects from the Texas Water Development Board, so that, when we do go to sell the deal, there's no issues.
Okay.
And we did.
Well, we can work on that, Jim. We can certainly work on a schedule from the bond issue side, and then also work with LJA to start putting together an actual project schedule.
And just an update, we, MUD 47 voted 3, it was a split vote, but 3 in favor of kind of carrying this forward with getting some more information to them. So I guess the good news is there, it stays on their agenda to give them another look next month.
And to just follow up on what Jim has said, basically, all the partners, everybody's supportive. It's the details that seem to be getting in the way. And of course, that is concerning, because until we get the details ironed out and everybody's satisfied with that, people aren't putting, or the entities aren't putting money on the table. So we're going to continue to work whatever angles we can. The township is very, very supportive. But as Bruce said, there are political considerations, and those are very real that we have to work with. And that's why we're going to be working some other angles, including more partners with the MUDs. And once this meeting is over, I'm headed over to the water building to address the MUD 46 and see if we can get them to partner in at whatever level that they'd be willing to participate. Any questions or comments? If not, we'll move on. And Jim, anything else on the general manager's report?
There's a number of items that I was going to highlight, but it's all in the summary. So just in the interest of time, if you've got questions, I'll address those, but I won't go through my lengthy list.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Any questions for Jim then? If not, we'll move on to Paul and the trustees report.
So I guess a couple of items that would be of interest to our board. Number one, with the AMI project, you'll recall the discussion about there were 2 poles that were installed that apparently local neighborhoods took exception to, and I know that Jim's been working for months now trying to resolve those concerns. And it seems like painting would be a very low-rated option. Pretty much they're demanding, they're requesting that the poles be moved. And we do have some alternate sites and alternate costs. And I know Jim was going to go off and do some detailed discussion about that, or detailed, get a more finite number. And the question that came up, and this was the reason for all of this backlog or this discussion, is that is this a grid? For example, MUD 67 doesn't have any poles in its district, but as I understand it from a legal standpoint, a district must give its approval to release make a change to the agreement. So I know one of the MUDs has requested that we share the costs equally, since it is a grid. When I say equally, I mean in proportion to the number of hookups. And I had always considered it that way. And until Brian Yates brought that legal issue to the floor, I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. So Brian, maybe you could shed some light on that.
This is Brian. Happy to, Paul. So what the issue was is if a pole is being moved for purely aesthetic reason, it really boils down to what's the purpose of the change. Because each district has a contract with Amoresco for the project, and the project includes the individual meters for each district, as well as the shared infrastructure such as the poles. And if there are any changes to the contract and the location of the poles, et cetera, that were set out in the agreement, then there have to be change orders that are issued to approve that. And each district would have to approve that change order. If the change is being made due to a substantive matter, such as the poll for whatever reason didn't get the reception percentage that it was expected to have, and they needed to move it for that purpose, then it would be appropriate, certainly, for all the districts to approve a relocation for that reason. If the reason for the relocation is purely aesthetic, there's no obligation for the districts to approve such an aesthetic relocation. If the boards wanted to voluntarily, you could, but from a legal perspective, would you be required to? No. And so that's more what the discussion was about at the trustee level. And I think there was going to be some follow-up on that to see if there would be interest among all the districts to share in that, because an example was brought up about the odor at one of the wastewater treatment plants for the River Authority and how that impacted folks in one particular area, but was shared by all. And the discussion there revolved around the fact that that expense was, is ultimately embedded in the River Authority budget, which each district directs its trustee how to vote, and then each trustee ultimately approved that expense. So, the districts at the end of the day all voluntarily, approve for that expense, or not, but they're not obligated to do so. You could have a majority say, no, we don't want that in there, and it's going to have to be stripped out. So that's kind of where we are with this pole relocation. If all the districts want to approve a change order that has it in there, they can, but they're not obligated to do so. So hopefully that provides a little more explanation, Paul, that you were looking for.
Yes, thank you. So as a member or as a trustee, we would not be voting on it. Each MUD would vote on this individually, correct?
This is Brian. That's correct, as a change order to each district's contract.
Okay. So this is just information and a heads up that discussion will be forthcoming and a vote would be necessary. As I say, I was always under the impression that this would be a share alike according to the number of meters, but you can consider that. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else, Paul?
No, I think the rest of it's available, and I don't want to get into some ethics issues.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Any questions for Paul? If not, are there any matters for placement on a future agenda?
This is Brian. So I did pull up the Commissioners Court agenda while we were sitting here, and they've got an item about consideration, notices for consideration of the tax abatement agreement at their August 10th board meeting. So it looks like, or their August 10th Commissioners Court meeting. So it was not acted on at their meeting last week.
Okay, thank you. Any other items to be put on a future agenda? If not, we stand adjourned. And Shelley, would you add me to the 46 visitor list, and I'll be on my way.
Sure will.
Okay.
Thank y'all very much. Have a good evening.
We'll see everybody in
Roland.
person
Yeah,
next month.